Hello, my name is Lori. I'm 62 years old, and this is my story. After my husband passed away, I inherited our small motorcycle shop and the old safe where he kept years of savings. On my birthday, everything fell apart. My sons discovered the safe was empty and accused me of stealing the $70,000 their father had left them. No one believed me, not a single soul. I felt betrayed, humiliated, and completely alone. With nowhere to turn, I packed a small bag, mounted my husband's old Harley, and rode into the unknown, not knowing if I was running from them or towards something I desperately needed to find. The road became my sanctuary. The wind in my hair, the endless horizon, and the roar of the engine were the only things grounding me. Days blurred into nights as I wandered, carrying a mixture of grief, fear, and a spark of determination I thought I had lost. Then I stumbled upon a group of bikers, tattooed, fearless, and full of stories that made my own troubles seem both small and enormous at the same time. They didn't ask questions. They just saw something in me, something I wasn't even sure I recognized myself, something that would change the path of my life forever. What happened next would challenge everything I thought I knew about family, loyalty, and who I really am. Secrets buried for decades, truths that no one expected to see the light of day. All of it was waiting for me on the other side of that ride. But before we dive deeper, take a moment to subscribe to the channel and write in the comments where you're watching from. I love reading the comments and seeing where each of you is joining from. Now, let's uncover how this story truly begins and why nothing was ever as it seemed. I stood in my kitchen on my 62nd birthday, the faint scent of vanilla and cinnamon from the cake batter clinging to my clothes, clinging to my hands. I had spent the morning carefully mixing, folding, and scraping, each movement precise, comforting, grounding me in something familiar, something I could control. And then they came, unannounced. My children. Andrew and Sophia, the two people I had carried in my arms, nurtured through fevers, heartbreaks, and scraped knees, now standing before me with an accusation sharp enough to cut through every layer of love I thought we shared. "Mom, where's the money?" Andrew's voice rang out, rigid, accusing. It wasn't a question. It was a verdict. I froze mid-swipe of flour on my apron. My hands, flour-streaked and trembling slightly, had known gentler battles. This was not one of them. I swallowed hard, trying to anchor myself. "What money, sweetheart? Your father kept documents in there, some tools." Sophia stepped forward, heels clicking against the linoleum in a rhythm that somehow sounded like judgment. "Don't play dumb, Mom. Dad told us. $70,000, our inheritance." The words hit me like a gust of winter wind, leaving me shivering, exposed. 70,000. The sum was so foreign, so out of reach of reality that my mind stumbled over it. 70,000. Andrew, Sophia, there's never been that kind of money, I whispered, the edges of my voice trembling. Andrew's face reddened, muscles tight with anger and disbelief. "You spent it, didn't you? On what? This dump is still falling apart. Where is it, Mom?" I reached out instinctively toward Sophia, my fingers brushing against the air where her hand should have been. She recoiled, a flick of disdain or fear, or maybe both, and the space between us felt suddenly colder than the linoleum under my bare feet. "I dedicated 40 years to this family," my voice cracked, despite my effort to keep it even. "I would never—" "Save it," Sophia cut me off, sharper than I expected. "You've always been jealous of us. Dad said you resented our success." The dagger of words, so carefully chosen, pierced deeper than I could have imagined. Words I had never heard Tom utter were now flung at me by the children I had loved more fiercely than life itself. I felt my stomach twist, my throat tightening, the heat rising behind my eyes. Andrew's phone came up with a sharp click. "We're calling a lawyer. You stole from us, and you'll pay it back." Sophia's voice, cold and precise, followed like ice sliding across my heart. "This is our property now. We're done taking care of you." I looked at them, my children, the people I had bathed, fed, and comforted through every nightmare, and in that moment, they were strangers. Strangers who bore my face, but none of my understanding, none of my history. The silence that followed was punctuated only by my ragged breaths and the distant hum of the refrigerator, as if the house itself were holding its breath. Tears stung my eyes. I wiped them away, but they returned just as quickly. I grabbed my backpack, shoved in a few essential things, and moved toward the garage where Tom's old Harley waited. My Harley, the one we used to ride together every weekend, before the guilt of motherhood had been pressed onto my shoulders so heavily, I almost forgot the exhilaration of the road. The engine had been silent for 3 years, but the sight of it now stirred something fierce and undeniable in me. I ran my hands along the worn leather seat, fingers tracing the scratches and dents like reading a history written only for me. I twisted the key in the ignition, and the engine roared awake beneath me, a reminder that some parts of me had never dulled, never surrendered. Andrew's voice pierced the garage one last time. "And don't come back until you have our money." I didn't answer. I couldn't. The roar of the engine, the vibrations through my hands and arms, became a lifeline. I remembered who I used to be. A woman unafraid of the open road, unafraid of challenges, unafraid of claiming her place in a world that constantly told her she was too small, too quiet, too invisible. The wind whipped my hair as I pulled out of the driveway, tears mingling with the sun on my face, a strange cocktail of heartbreak and freedom. Every mile stretched out before me like a promise, and with each mile, I felt a piece of the weight lift. I was running from betrayal, yes, but also towards something I had almost forgotten: myself. I thought of Tom, his quiet strength, his eyes that had always met mine with trust and respect when I worked beside him in the shop. I thought of the life we had built together, the hidden victories in grease-stained hands and oil-slicked overalls. And though the ache of my children's rejection gnawed at me, I felt a spark ignite. The possibility that I could reclaim my story, rewrite it, and finally honor the life I had built, not for anyone else, but for me. As the desert stretched on before me, endless and golden, I allowed myself to remember the simple joy of speed, the intoxicating scent of gasoline and dust, the thrill of being alive and untethered. The road would be long and the journey painful, but it would also be mine. And for the first time in decades, I felt the raw, undeniable truth. I wasn't running from my life. I was returning to it, on my terms, with the engine as my heartbeat and the open sky as my witness. 3 days on the road, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I sensed a strange sort of homecoming. The wind whipped against my face, carrying the smell of desert dust and sun-warmed asphalt. The engine's rumble beneath me wasn't just a sound, it was a rhythm that spoke to some hidden part of my soul, a heartbeat I had long ignored while tending to the expectations of others. This was always my therapy, my meditation, my sacred space where thoughts could wander freely without judgment. Memories of Tom riding alongside me surfaced unbidden. His laugh, the way he gripped the handlebars, the playful nudges when he challenged me to keep up with him. Those Sundays had been ours, pure, untainted by the incessant pressure of life, before our children made us feel guilty for wanting a few hours of freedom. By the time I rolled into Flagstaff, Arizona, the sun was just tipping the horizon, painting the sky in burnt orange and soft violet. I pulled into a quiet diner, the kind with faded neon signs and grease-stained menus, and parked my Harley. The carburetor was running a bit rich, something I could feel in the subtle drag of the engine, so I knelt by the bike, wiping my hands on a rag as I adjusted the mixture. A voice, gravelly yet warm, broke through the morning air. "That's a '78 Shovelhead. Doesn't see many of those anymore, and even fewer people who know how to tune them right." I looked up to see a woman about my age, her arms a tapestry of tattoos, each one a story etched into her skin. A leather vest with patches hugged her frame, signaling a life spent on roads less traveled. She extended her hand confidently. "Name's Rita. You clearly know your way around an engine." I paused, surprised at the recognition, and wiped the grease off my fingers before shaking her hand. "Lori," I said softly, "learned from my dad, taught my husband, spent 30 years in our shop." Her eyes lit up. "A shop," she repeated, a spark of excitement breaking across her face. "We could use someone like you. Our mechanic just moved to Colorado." Inside the diner, the scent of bacon and coffee mingled with the lingering smell of gasoline from my bike. Rita led me to a corner booth, introducing me to her riding group, the Iron Angels Motorcycle Club. There was Morrison, a grizzled man in his 70s with a thick white beard and eyes that seemed to weigh everything they saw. "Rita says you're a wrench," he said, nodding toward me. "We got 3 bikes that need work. You interested in some cash?" The old Lori would have politely declined. She would have feared imposing, worried that she didn't belong in a world so different from the domestic cage she had been living in for decades. But this morning, I felt a hunger I hadn't acknowledged in years, a need for purpose, for distraction, for the simple joy of doing what I loved. And honestly, I had missed the smell of engine oil, the subtle friction of metal against metal, the satisfaction of coaxing life back into a machine. "Show me what you got," I said, my voice firmer than I expected, a tremor of excitement threading through the words. Over eggs and hash browns, the conversation meandered naturally, unforced. No one asked why I was alone. No one demanded to know where I was heading. They spoke of bikes, of open roads stretching beyond the horizon, of freedom and the thrill of living deliberately. Rita's eyes softened as she noticed my hands shaking when I mentioned my children. "Whatever you're running from, darling," she said, squeezing my fingers gently. "Sometimes the road gives you what you need." Morrison, meanwhile, leaned back and studied my Harley through the window, nodding appreciatively. "That's a well-maintained machine," he said. "You've got good hands." My chest tightened, and I whispered more to myself than to him. "It's all I have left of the life I built." Rita's grip on my hand tightened, a gesture of solidarity and understanding that I had not realized I had been starving for. "Then let's make sure she keeps running strong. Come to our compound, work on our bikes, stay as long as you need." Her words were an invitation and a lifeline. They spoke of trust, of acceptance, of a place where I could be seen fully, not as someone diminished or sidelined by family disputes or societal expectations, but as I truly was, a capable, skilled, and passionate woman. That night, lying in a clean bed in the clubhouse guest room, I allowed myself to release the tension I had carried for weeks, months, years. I cried quietly, softly, as if the walls themselves would absorb my grief and carry it away. Outside, the hum of motorcycles grew louder, the steady vibration of engines starting, wheels rolling over gravel. I realized with a jolt that this sound, this pure, unbridled chorus of life and movement, had once been my heartbeat. And somehow I had let my children convince me that I was too old, too fragile, too domesticated to claim it again. In that moment, as the wind rustled the edges of the open window and the moonlight pooled across the floorboards, something within me shifted. I felt a spark of belonging, a warmth of kinship with strangers who, somehow, already felt like family. The Iron Angels weren't just a club. They were a mirror reflecting the parts of me I had hidden for decades. Courage, skill, independence, resilience. They all resonated in the clinking of tools, the roar of engines, and the laughter echoing down the hallways. I traced my fingers over the leather seat of my bike, remembering the long roads I had traveled with Tom, the silent moments of joy, the wind in my hair, the sense of infinite possibility that had always accompanied the open road. Now, I realized, that possibility wasn't lost. It had just been waiting for me to claim it again. As sleep finally claimed me, I dreamed not of the accusations, not of the anger, but of the road stretching endlessly, golden in the morning sun, and of myself riding through it with pride, freedom, and a heart lighter than it had been in decades. I knew the journey ahead would be long, uncertain, and at times lonely, but for the first time, I also knew that I would not ride it alone. I had found my tribe, my purpose, and slowly, the path back to myself. 2 weeks passed in what felt like a lifetime, and somehow I had become the unofficial head mechanic of the Iron Angels compound. It wasn't a title anyone had handed me, but it wasn't needed. My hands remembered everything. Timing adjustments, electrical diagnostics, engine rebuilds, the subtle tug of a clutch cable, the almost imperceptible hum of a valve out of place. Each movement was instinctive, yet each carried weight, the memory of decades spent with Tom in our cramped shop, of the hours I had bent over engines while the world outside demanded I be a mother first. "You're a natural teacher," Morrison said one afternoon, as I showed a younger member how to replace brake pads. His gravelly voice carried a warmth I hadn't expected, tempered with respect. Patient, thorough. I glanced up, a faint smile brushing my lips. "I used to teach Tom everything," I admitted quietly. "He was the face of the business, the one who charmed customers, but I was the one who kept those bikes running." Rita raised a tattooed brow, a faint amusement and curiosity mingling in her expression. "Your kids know that?" I let out a bitter laugh, almost a cough of old pain. "They think I just answered phones and made coffee." The truth, the one that had gnawed at me for years, came rushing back. After the kids were born, Tom slowly pushed me out of the shop, said customers preferred dealing with a man, that I should focus on being a mother, that my hands, though skilled, didn't need to touch the grease. I let him take credit for my work because that's what I thought a good wife did. And for decades, I had carried that resentment quietly, masked with smiles and silent endurance. Rita and I often rode at sunrise now, when the world was just waking, and the sky bled pink and amber over the horizon. On one such ride, she shared a wound of her own, a daughter who had cut her off 10 years ago. "Family can hurt you worse than any stranger, Lori," she said, her voice gentle but firm, riding in rhythm beside me. I hugged the wind as if it could carry away my doubt. "I just keep thinking," I confessed, letting the words tumble over the roar of the engine. "What if they're right? What if I somehow forgot about the money?" Rita's voice cut through sharply, yet with a tenderness I could feel deep in my chest. "Bull!" she snapped, turning to look at me, her leather gloves gripping the handlebars. "You know your truth. Don't let them rewrite your story." Back at the compound, the morning sun spilling through the garage doors, I immersed myself in my Harley, performing a deep maintenance check that should have been done years ago. Each bolt, each cable, each inch of the frame received careful attention. It was both routine and ritual, a way to anchor myself when the memories threatened to pull me under. When I removed the seat to inspect for rust along the frame, Morrison wandered over, leaning on a wrench with quiet patience. "Find anything interesting?" My fingers traced an unusual seam beneath the seat pan. Something about it felt deliberate, precise, but not original. "This doesn't look factory," I murmured, the old instinct of investigation kicking in. Tom must have modified it. We pried it open carefully, each movement deliberate, reverent even, as though disturbing the past could break fragile barriers. Inside, a yellowed envelope, bank receipts, and a folded letter in Tom's unmistakable handwriting stared back at me. My hands trembled violently as I unfolded the paper. The ink, faded yet unmistakable, formed the words that would finally release the hold of doubt around my heart. "My dearest Lori, if you're reading this..." Tears blurred my vision as the truth spilled across the page. Medical bills I had never known about, gambling debts from his youth that had resurfaced, loans he had taken to keep our shop alive, debts he had hidden, all meticulously detailed. Each word felt like both a balm and a blade. "I spent it all to protect you from my mistakes," the letter continued, and I could hear his voice quivering with shame and love across the years. "I'm a coward. I told the kids there was money because I wanted them to think I was successful. I hid this where I knew only you would find it. You were always the better mechanic. Forgive me. Tom, the bank receipts confirmed it. The last withdrawal had been 4 months before his death, every dollar flowing to creditors. No deception beyond the veil of protection. I collapsed onto the garage floor, the letter pressed to my chest, body trembling from exhaustion, grief, and a confusion of emotions I could scarcely name. Morrison knelt beside me, his hand resting lightly on my shoulder. "What do you need, Laurie?" he asked, his voice careful, patient, unwavering. I looked up at him, and for the first time since my birthday, I felt something other than sorrow. Fury surged within me, pure and righteous. Fury that Tom had known I would eventually work on this bike, that I would eventually find the truth. And still, he had left me walking blind into the discovery. Fury that all the years of bitterness, self-doubt, and misplaced guilt could have been tempered by honesty. But within that fury, there was also a strange liberation. The anger was mine, not theirs, not a result of my children's assumptions, not a shadow of the lies I had carried. It was mine to own, mine to channel into reclamation, into the life I still had the power to shape. I pressed the letter to my face, inhaled the faint scent of old paper and ink, and imagined Tom, decades younger, sitting across from me, ashamed yet tender. And I whispered, almost to him, almost to the empty garage, "I see you. I forgive you. And I will not let this break me. Not anymore." The sun climbed higher, spilling light across the garage, illuminating the dust motes dancing like sparks around me. I could feel the energy in my hands, the memory of metal, grease, and life flowing through me. The engine before me was no longer just a machine. It was a testament to endurance, to love, to mistakes and forgiveness. I would restore it, not just for me, but for the memory of a life built on dedication, courage, and resilience. For the first time in years, the garage felt like home. Not just a place where engines lived, but where I could finally breathe, where I could finally be seen, and where the work of healing, of reclaiming myself, had truly begun. I spent 3 days in that small, sunlit room at the Iron Angels compound. Tom's letter crumpled in my hands more times than I could count. I read every line as if it were a lifeline, a confession wrapped in love and shame. Each reading revealed a new layer of him, of us, of the life we had built together. He loved me, he really had, but he lied. And worse, he hid the truth in the one place he knew my children would never look, buried beneath the hood of a machine they had always considered beneath them, too simple, too greasy, too unladylike for their tastes. For decades, they had looked down on my love for motorcycles, on the hum of engines, the smell of oil, the greasy fingerprints smeared on my hands. They called it a weird phase of mine, something temporary, something odd that I would grow out of. They had no idea it was not a phase. It was my heartbeat, my meditation, my sanctuary. They had no idea that each nut I tightened, each cable I adjusted, was a stitch in the fabric of my life, my identity, my soul. A soft knock interrupted my thoughts. "Laurie, you okay in there?" Rita's voice was tentative, patient, carrying that quiet strength she always seemed to summon. I opened the door slowly, my face still streaked from nights of tears and long hours of contemplation. She looked at me, and I could see it, the spark that had been buried beneath layers of grief and doubt. Her lips curved into a knowing smile. "There she is," she said, her voice warm and triumphant. "The real Laurie." I straightened my shoulders, drawing a deep, steadying breath. "I need to go back," I said firmly, my voice stronger than I felt. "Not to beg, not to apologize, to show them exactly who I am and what I'm capable of." Rita's grin widened, sharp and genuine, the kind that could ignite courage in anyone. "Then let's make sure you look the part," she said, and in that moment, I knew she meant more than clothes. She meant presence, confidence, reclamation. The next day, she took me to a small salon in Phoenix where her niece worked. My gray hair, long and soft, was transformed into a modern cut, still me, still familiar, but sharper, more assertive, a reflection of the woman I was becoming. Each snip of the scissors seemed to cut away the years of doubt and self-effacement, leaving behind a version of myself I hadn't dared to acknowledge in decades. Rita didn't stop there. She dragged me to a small boutique, insisting on a leather jacket that hugged my frame perfectly, fitted jeans that emphasized strength rather than concealment, boots that made me feel rooted, unshakable. "You've always been a badass, honey," she said, her hands on my shoulders. "You just forgot for a while." Back at the compound, I turned to my Harley, my old friend, my constant. I gave her a complete makeover, a reinvention to match my own. Deep purple with silver accents, chrome polished until it gleamed, performance upgrades that made her purr like a panther. Morrison watched quietly, his old eyes bright with approval. "That's not just a bike anymore," he said. "That's a statement." "Damn right it is," I muttered, tightening the final bolt with a satisfying click. My hands, steady and skilled, were instruments of reclamation, of proof that I was still capable of mastery. Rita and I began role-playing in the compound's garage, her and the Iron Angels acting as harsh attorneys, challenging me, testing me, making me dig deep for every ounce of self-assurance. "They'll try to make you feel small," Rita coached. "Don't let them. You're a master mechanic who built a business from the ground up. You know your truth." Morrison handed me a leather saddlebag, thick and worn but sturdy, a vessel of evidence. "All the facts," he said simply. "Letter, receipts, timeline. Facts don't lie." I held the saddlebag in my lap, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what they were giving me. "Why are you all helping me?" I asked, voice choked, eyes brimming with gratitude and disbelief. Rita hugged me tight, the warmth of her leather-clad body grounding me. "Because we see you, Lori, the real you. The one who belongs on the road, not behind a kitchen counter." With shaking hands, I retrieved a burner phone, my heart thrumming with anticipation, fury, and an unfamiliar twinge of exhilaration. I dialed Andrew, hearing the faint static before his voice answered. "It's Mom," I said, firm and unwavering. "I found proof. I'm filing a defamation lawsuit. See you in court." I hung up before he could reply, my pulse still hammering in my ears, adrenaline and clarity coiling inside me like a live wire. 48 hours later, I was back on the road, engine humming under me, a purr of steel and freedom. The desert stretched endlessly on either side, the wind biting at my face but invigorating, filling me with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in decades. Each mile shed layers of doubt, grief, and fear. Each rotation of the wheels was a beat of my own rediscovered heart. I was not the woman who had left Nevada. I was sharper, fiercer, and undeniably present. I was the mechanic, the mother, the warrior, the woman who had built a life from grease and sweat and love, and no amount of condescension or ignorance from my children could erase that. I was the woman in the mirror now, and she was someone who demanded to be seen, respected, and, above all, unafraid to reclaim her story. And as the horizon stretched ahead, blazing gold and orange, I realized something profound. The road had always been mine. It had been waiting for me to remember, to reclaim, to ride fully into the life I was always meant to live. With my Harley beneath me and the wind against my face, I felt whole again, unbroken, and alive in a way I had not dared in years. This was my reclamation, my statement, my journey back to myself, and I knew with every fiber of my being that nothing, no fear, no doubt, no betrayal, could ever take it from me again. I arrived in my hometown on a bright Tuesday afternoon, the sun glinting off the deep purple of my Harley as I pulled up to the local news station. The engine hummed, alive beneath me, a reflection of my own renewed pulse, and people stopped in their tracks, eyes wide, jaws slack, whispers spreading through the crowd like wildfire. Lori Patterson, on a motorcycle? The Lori Patterson who used to bake cookies for PTA meetings, who once volunteered at school carnivals and drove minivans for carpool duty? The contrast was startling, even to me. But inside, I felt nothing but a quiet, confident thrill. Janet Reeves, my attorney, met me at her office, her heels clicking against the polished floor, clipboard in hand, expression professional but tinged with excitement. "Lori," she said, her voice precise, steady, "this is solid. We can win this." I looked her straight in the eyes, feeling my heart race with more than just anticipation. "I don't just want to win," I said, voice low and deliberate. "I want them to understand exactly what they threw away. All these years, the life they dismissed, the hands that built everything they claimed to own." She nodded, understanding that this was bigger than the courtroom. It was the reclamation of my story. "Then we go public," she said. "Court is public record. Local news loves family drama. You ready for that?" I thought of every bike I had fixed, every engine I had rebuilt, every hour I had poured into a shop that my children had assumed I barely touched, every skill I had hidden to let Tom shine, every moment I had made myself small, polite, invisible. And I realized I was ready. "Yes," I said finally, "I'm ready." We filed the lawsuit, defamation, emotional distress, and a claim against the estate for improper distribution of assets. It felt surreal, almost like stepping into someone else's story. Yet it was mine, fully and unmistakably mine. The local newspaper picked up the story the next day, the headline glaring across the front page, "Local Widow and Master Mechanic Sues Children Over False Theft Accusations." The words struck me in a strange, satisfying way. I had always known the truth. Now the world would too. The phone rang. Andrew, furious, predictable. "Mom, what are you doing? You're riding around on that stupid bike, making us look like fools." I smiled inwardly, tightening my grip on the phone. "That stupid bike," I said, voice steady and steel, "is a custom '78 shovelhead that I've been maintaining and upgrading for 30 years. And you will hear the truth in front of everyone." Sophia texted me soon after. "We can settle this privately. This isn't like you, Mom." I typed back without hesitation. "You're right. The old me would have stayed quiet. Not anymore." Walking through town later that afternoon, I felt the weight of old memories pressing against the warmth of sunlight. I stopped by the old motorcycle shop, now boarded up, paint peeling from years of neglect. I ran my fingers along the weathered wood, remembering every greasy handshake, every engine I coaxed back to life, every patient lesson I gave Tom when he claimed to understand the mechanics better than I did. Mrs. Chen from the grocery store spotted me as I lingered there. Her eyes lit up and she crossed the street with surprising speed for a woman her age. "Lori," she called, voice warm and filled with recognition. "I always knew this place ran because of you. Tom was the talker, but you were the genius." "You knew?" I asked softly, almost afraid of her answer. She chuckled, shaking her head, exasperation laced with affection. "Honey, everyone knew. We used to joke that Tom couldn't change a tire without you. You were the real backbone of that shop." Her words cracked something open in me, something I had held tightly under layers of guilt and self-doubt. Yet I held myself together, letting the warmth of validation wash over me quietly, without letting it spill too far into tears just yet. The preliminary hearing was set for 2 weeks out, and Janet's warnings were precise and sobering. "They'll try to paint you as unstable," she said over coffee in her office, her tone steady and precise. "A woman who abandoned her family, fell in with bikers, and came back for revenge." I let a slow smile creep over my lips, sharp and deliberate. "Let them try," I said, voice calm but strong. "I have 30 years of customer testimonials saying I'm one of the best mechanics in the state. That, and the truth. That night, I stayed in a small motel on the outskirts of town, the hum of engines from passing cars, a faint echo of the freedom I had reclaimed. My thoughts swirled, not with fear, but with reflection. I thought about all the times I had made myself smaller, letting Tom take credit, letting my children dismiss my skills, letting their narrow perceptions define my self-worth. Rita called just as I was unpacking my bag. Her voice came through warm, firm, unwavering. "How are you holding up, sister?" "I keep thinking about all the times I made myself smaller," I admitted, voice barely above a whisper. "Let Tom take credit. Let the kids dismiss my skills. Let everyone assume I didn't matter." "That ends now," she said, firm and commanding. "You're not small anymore, Lori. You're not invisible. You're the one who built it all, and now it's time everyone else sees it too." The next morning, as I walked through the cafe parking lot, I saw Andrew hunched over a flat tire, muttering curses under his breath. And something in me stirred, not sympathy, not spite, but a quiet, sharp realization. I had never taught him basic maintenance because he always said it was boring. He had shrugged off the lessons that had shaped my life, dismissing them as trivial. And yet, here he was, helpless without the very skills I had spent decades mastering. I leaned against my Harley, letting the sunlight catch the chrome, letting the wind lift strands of my hair, and I knew, with a deep, bone-level certainty, that nothing would be the same again. I wasn't the woman who had left town on a whim or in grief. I wasn't the one who had allowed others to define my worth. I was the woman who had fought, who had rebuilt, who had claimed her power back in the quiet spaces of a garage, in the early morning rides, in the hum of an engine and the solid feel of a wrench in her hand. This return wasn't just about the lawsuit or the court. It was about reclaiming my life, my voice, my identity. And as I mounted my Harley, feeling the engine's steady growl beneath me, I understood that no apology, no recognition, no verdict could match the fierce, intoxicating clarity of knowing I had finally returned to myself. I fired up the engine, the vibration coursing through my body, and headed into town, every mile a declaration. I was back, and I would no longer shrink to fit into someone else's story. This was my narrative, my triumph, my reclamation, and nothing, not fear, not judgment, not even my children's disbelief, could take it from me. The week of discovery felt heavier than I had anticipated. Each document, each spreadsheet, each email felt like a shard of glass, sharp and cutting, threatening to open old wounds I thought had scabbed over. I sat across from Janet Reeves in her office, sun streaming through the blinds, dust motes floating like tiny ghosts. Her fingers hovered over a stack of papers, eyes scanning for patterns, discrepancies, truths hidden in plain sight. And then she looked up at me, her face taut with gravity. "Lori, you're going to want to sit down for this one." I did, even though my hands were trembling. The paper slid across the polished table, a small, innocuous sheet that carried a revelation capable of toppling everything I had reconstructed in my mind. Andrew, my own son. He had tried to sell the motorcycle shop 3 weeks before my birthday. 3 weeks. And the deal had fallen through, not because of the buyer's second thoughts, but because the equipment, the machinery, the lifeblood of the shop was broken. My stomach turned, a heavy twisting knot that lodged itself deep in my chest. He needed quick cash, Janet said carefully, almost gently, like explaining to a child why a vase had shattered. Business trouble. The shop was failing because he didn't know how to run it. I couldn't breathe at first. The words reverberated like a hammer striking steel. "He inherited a profitable business," I whispered, voice barely audible, "and ran it into the ground in 2 years. Janet's eyes softened, but her tone remained steady. "Because he didn't have you. The shop records show you handled all the mechanical work, inventory, and customer relationships. Tom handled sales. Andrew can't do either." Pieces of the past slotted together, sharp and bitter. The lost invoices, the missed deadlines, the customers who stopped coming, the subtle sabotage of the shop's reputation, it was all starting to make sense. Andrew had known the shop was dying, had needed money desperately, and the inheritance had been his final hope. But when that hope slipped, he had done what? Accused me? Blamed me for the failure that was entirely his doing? This wasn't just about the money, I whispered, more to myself than to Janet. He blamed me for his own incompetence. Janet nodded, grim but resolute. We can use this. Shows motive to falsely accuse you. This is powerful, Lori. Then my phone rang, Morrison's name flashing across the screen. I answered, voice tight with anticipation. Lori, you sitting down? I gritted my teeth. And? I tracked down some of your old customers from the shop, he said, his voice a mixture of amusement and pride. They want to testify. Said Andrew couldn't fix a bicycle, let alone a Harley. They stopped coming when you weren't there. My breath caught. Validation, something I had silently craved for decades. Not applause, not pity, just acknowledgement from people who had known the truth all along. My hands gripped the edge of the table as Morrison continued. There's more, he said. Tom took out a life insurance policy 5 years ago. $200,000. Beneficiary, you. I stared at the ceiling, letting the words settle in. Tom. In his flawed, human way, he had tried to provide for me, hiding it in the one place Andrew would never think to look. In my name, not the business. My heart ached, full of love and frustration all at once. The same man who had protected me in life had now given me a weapon to protect myself after his death. But first, they had to face what they had done. I couldn't allow this to be rewritten or softened by sentimentality. Justice demanded clarity. Truth demanded confrontation. The court date approached with the relentless pace of a desert wind, dry and unyielding. Then a letter arrived, handwritten in Sophia's familiar scrawl. Mom, please, we made a mistake. Andrew's falling apart. Can we talk? For a moment, the old Lori, the caregiver, the peacemaker, the woman who had always softened edges to prevent hurt, wanted to pick up the phone, wanted to reach across the gulf of their mistakes and offer forgiveness. But the memory of Sophia laughing when I had suggested she learn to ride hit me like a fist. That's so beneath me, Mom. I folded the letter carefully, placing it in the evidence folder with every other fact, every shred of proof. Empathy would have to wait. Today, it was about reclamation, not reconciliation. Later that afternoon, Janet called with news. Local news wants to cover the hearing. Channel 7. You okay with cameras? I paused, considering. The glare of the camera, the possibility of judgment, the eyes of the world focusing on my vulnerabilities, but also on my truth. I thought of every woman dismissed, every hand that built what others claimed, every skill that was belittled because of gender or circumstance. Yes, I said finally, voice firm. Let them see what they underestimated. The night before court, I returned to the solace of the garage. My Harley sat waiting, gleaming under the fluorescent light, chrome reflecting every moment of sweat and concentration I had poured into it over the years. I pulled out the carburetor, laid out my tools, and worked with deliberate focus, letting the familiar resistance of metal, the subtle give of a gasket, the tension of screws and springs calm the storm in my chest. As I tightened the final bolt, I whispered to Tom's memory, soft and reverent. I wish you'd trusted me with the truth. But I'll show them what we really built together. Not the story they told themselves, not the one they wanted me to be, the one we made. Together. The garage smelled of oil, polish, and resolve. Each twist of the wrench, each measured adjustment, grounded me. I felt his presence in the rhythm of my work, in the heartbeat of the engine, in the certainty that I was standing on the foundation we had built, a foundation they had tried to crack, but I would not allow it. And as the night deepened, the stars over the desert sky winking like distant reminders of endurance and resilience, I realized something vital. The battle ahead was not just legal. It was about claiming the narrative of my life, the legacy of my labor, and the truth of my worth. I had been underestimated for decades. Now, finally, it was time for the world to see. I walked into the courthouse with a heartbeat that thrummed like the engine of my Harley. Leather jacket snug, boots heavy and grounding, helmet under my arm, I felt an unfamiliar but welcome surge of power. Beside me, Rita and Morrison flanked me like sentinels, their presence steadying my nerves in ways words never could. Cameras flashed, reporters shouted questions, voices breaking through the hum of anxious spectators and the sterile smell of polished wood. "Ms. Patterson, is it true you're a master motorcycle mechanic?" a reporter called, pen poised, voice sharp with curiosity and disbelief. 28 years in the business," I answered, letting my confidence rise naturally from the work I had done, the years I had poured into grease-stained hands, late nights, and early mornings. "Best education you can get." My words were calm, but every syllable carried a weight of truth. Inside, the courtroom air was heavy with anticipation. Andrew sat with a slouch that betrayed exhaustion, pale and defeated, while Sophia avoided my gaze, her fingers twisting the hem of her blouse, guilty and hesitant. Across from them, Bradley Cooper, no relation, he always joked, sat impeccably straight in an expensive suit that seemed almost comical in contrast to the sweat and effort I had poured into every machine I had touched. Judge Miriam Walsh, stern and unyielding, called the court to order. Her voice was crisp, carrying the authority of years of experience. "This is a civil case regarding defamation and estate disputes. Let's proceed." Janet moved with quiet precision, laying out every piece of evidence like an artist arranging a mosaic. Tom's letter, bank receipts, a meticulous timeline of debt payments. It was all there, all verifiable, all irrefutable. "Your Honor," Janet stated, voice steady, eyes meeting the judge's. "Thomas Patterson spent that money years before his death. There was no theft. My client was falsely accused and forcibly removed from her home." Bradley rose smoothly, voice oiled with practiced confidence. "Your Honor, Mrs. Patterson abandoned her family. She chose to run away rather than explain. I was thrown out." My voice rang through the courtroom, cutting across his rehearsed rhythm like a gunshot. Heads turned. Even the bailiff flinched slightly at the force of my words. My hands were steady at my sides, the same hands that had rebuilt engines, replaced brake lines, and forged a life of labor and passion from the ground up. Capable hands, unflinching hands. Judge Walsh's eyes softened slightly, though her tone remained firm. "Ms. Patterson, you'll have your turn to testify." Taking the stand, I felt the familiar grounding of control, the hum of my own strength beneath the surface. Janet's voice was gentle, coaxing rather than demanding. "Lori, tell the court what happened on your birthday." I took a deep breath, letting memories flood back with every inhale. The way the cake batter had clung to my hands, the sharp sting of betrayal when Andrew accused me of theft, Sophia's cold dismissal, the disbelief in their eyes. I spoke each detail, letting them feel the dissonance of ordinary domesticity twisted by cruelty. "But here's what they didn't know," I continued, letting my voice strengthen with the truth. "That safe? I installed it. That shop? I built it from the ground up with Tom. Every successful repair, every satisfied customer, that was my work." The murmurs that rippled through the courtroom were tangible, a gentle acknowledgement from strangers finally recognizing what my children had long dismissed. Bradley leaned forward, smirk barely concealed, trying to shake me. "Isn't it true you've been living with a motorcycle gang?" Hardly the behavior of a grieving widow. I met his gaze, calm and unwavering. "I've been doing what I've always done," I said firmly. "Working on motorcycles, which is my profession and my passion, something my children always looked down on. That is the measure of who I am, not their approval." Janet then brought forth the testimony I had been quietly savoring. 5 former customers, each with stories, each with memories, praising my skill, lamenting the shop's decline under Andrew's inept management. Mr. Rodriguez, a stout man with calloused hands like mine, leaned forward. "Lori Patterson is the best mechanic I've ever met." When she left, the shop died. I watched Andrew's face turn white, the mask of arrogance cracking under the weight of truth. Sophia's hands twisted together, a guilty plea unspoken in her eyes. Then Janet dropped the final crushing bomb. "Your Honor, I'd like to submit evidence that Andrew Patterson tried to sell the family business just weeks before accusing his mother of theft. The sale fell through because he'd let the equipment and reputation deteriorate." The courtroom held its breath. I felt my pulse in my throat, in my palms, in the firm grip I maintained on the witness stand. "This was never about justice," Janet continued, voice rising with righteous clarity. "This was about a son who couldn't fill his mother's shoes, a son who resented her talent, her skill, her independence, who saw her presence as a threat instead of the foundation it always was." Judge Walsh's expression hardened, eyes narrowing on Andrew. "Is this true, Mr. Patterson?" He opened his mouth, faltered, and closed it again. Words didn't come. Guilt, exposure, and shame weighed on him heavier than any courtroom could impose. I inhaled slowly, letting the tension settle. The weight I had carried for decades, the accusations, the dismissal, the betrayal, was shifting. It wasn't gone, but it had a name, a cause, a clear path to reckoning. And for the first time in years, I felt free in my own skin, standing tall, recognized not for being a mother, not for being small or polite, but for being the woman who built engines, who built a life, who refused to be minimized any longer. As I stepped down from the stand, the clatter of pens and papers, the soft shuffle of shoes across the polished floor, I realized something profound. This wasn't just a courtroom battle. This was a reclamation, a recognition of worth. And no matter the verdict, I had already won something they could never take. The knowledge that I was never just anyone's wife or mother. I was, always, a creator, a builder, a force of skill, passion, and resilience. Rita's hand found mine under the table, a silent squeeze. Morrison's nod from the back of the courtroom was almost imperceptible, but it anchored me, reminded me of the road that had brought me here, of every mile, every wrench, every lesson learned the hard way. And as the judge called for a short recess, I exhaled, the air tasting like victory and diesel and promise. I was ready to face them. Not the mother they expected, not the shadow they hoped to diminish, but the real Lori Patterson, standing tall, engine of her own life revving with undeniable force. The hallway felt impossibly narrow, the murmur of the court fading behind me, replaced by the pounding of my own heartbeat. Sophia appeared at the corner, eyes wide, cheeks flushed, tears threatening to spill over. She hesitated, as if the words she was about to speak might crumble under their own weight. "Mom, please," she whispered, voice trembling. "Andrew's business. It's gone. He's losing everything." I looked at her, seeing the familiar softness of her face, the girl I had raised, now trembling under the weight of guilt and fear. I spoke quietly, almost mournfully. "Because he didn't know how to run it. Because neither of you ever respected what I did." Sophia flinched at the edge of truth. I didn't know. Dad always said he was the mechanic." "And you never questioned it," I interrupted gently but firmly. "Never came to the shop, never asked, never cared. It was easier to believe I was just the secretary." Her lips quivered. Tears streaked down her face, raw and unguarded. "I'm sorry," she murmured, her voice breaking. I swallowed hard, letting the silence stretch between us. "Sorry doesn't give me back the life I hid for 40 years, I said, my voice steady, though my chest ached with all the years of unseen labor, stolen acknowledgement, and quiet endurance. It doesn't erase the fact that I spent decades being smaller than I was, also my family could feel comfortable. Her shoulders shook, and I wanted to reach out, to comfort her, but this wasn't about comfort anymore. It was about truth, and the truth was mine to hold, finally and fully. Before I could process more, Bradley approached, his polished shoes clicking against the marble floor, a businesslike smirk plastered across his face. $200,000, he said smoothly, as if reciting lines from a script. Drop the suit, sign an NDA, walk away. Janet's eyebrows lifted, astonishment flickering across her face. Lori, that's significant money, she murmured. I let my gaze meet Bradley's, calm but sharp. Where's it coming from? I asked, the edges of my voice steel. He shifted uneasily, avoiding my eyes. The life insurance policy. They found out this morning. The realization hit me with a pulse of cold fury. They were trying to buy my silence with my own money. The money Tom had left specifically for me, the money he had carefully hidden in a way only I could claim. No deal, I said firmly, letting the words resonate in the hall like the rev of an engine I had tuned to perfection. That money was always mine. Tom made sure of that. Bradley's face tightened, the veneer of confidence cracking. Ms. Patterson, be reasonable. I am being reasonable, I cut in, voice unwavering. I'm letting the truth be told. That's all I've ever wanted. Inside the courtroom, Judge Walsh reviewed the evidence with meticulous focus, her eyes scanning letters, receipts, and customer testimonials. She paused, then looked sharply at Andrew. Mr. Patterson, she said, her tone heavy and deliberate, did you or did you not knowingly accuse your mother of theft while concealing that your mismanagement destroyed the family business? Andrew's attorney opened his mouth, but Andrew shook his head, shoulders slumping. Yes, Your Honor, he said, voice barely audible at first, then stronger with the weight of confession. I couldn't do what she did. I failed. The courtroom erupted. Gasps, murmurs, the shuffle of papers, the snap of cameras. Sophia buried her face in her hands, sobbing openly, the guilt she had carried unshielded at last. Judge Walsh's gavel struck the bench with authority. Order, she commanded, silencing the room. I am ruling in favor of the plaintiff. Defamation proven. The words hit me like the rush of wind on an open road. Relief, vindication, and an almost overwhelming sense of justice swept through me. The judge continued, her tone deliberate and firm. She ordered Andrew and Sophia to issue a public apology, pay my legal fees, and acknowledge the life insurance policy as solely mine. Furthermore, Judge Walsh added, her voice ringing with clarity, I want to state for the record, Mrs. Patterson's contributions to her family business have been systematically erased. This court recognizes her as a skilled professional who deserves respect. Outside, the press swarmed. Cameras flashed, microphones thrust forward, questions shouted from all directions. Ms. Patterson, how does it feel to be vindicated? One reporter called, urgency and awe in her voice. I faced the cameras, letting my leather jacket settle on my shoulders like armor, the sun catching the silver streaks in my hair, my eyes clear and steady. It feels like the truth, I said. For 40 years, I let my husband take credit for my work. I let my children think I was less than I am. Never again. A reporter asked, "What's next for you?" I smiled, the curve of my lips carrying the weight of decades of reclamation, of roads traveled and miles earned. I'm opening my own shop, Patterson Precision Motorcycles. This time, my name's on it. The story went viral within hours, shared across social media, local news, and motorcycle forums alike. Headlines blared, Master Mechanic Grandmother Exposes Family's Lies, Plans New Business. Photos of me on my gleaming purple shovel head, helmet tucked under one arm, leather jacket glinting in the sun, became symbols of resilience and unapologetic self-worth. That night, back in my motel room, I finally allowed myself to breathe fully. The old Lori, the quiet, accommodating, self-effacing Lori, was gone. In her place stood a woman who had been underestimated, dismissed and silenced, yet had reclaimed everything she had ever built with her own hands. My heart ached with the memories, but it also surged with hope. I reached over to my phone and dialed Rita, voice trembling with gratitude and triumph. "We did it," I whispered, letting a laugh escape that felt like liberation. "We really did it." She chuckled, warm and triumphant. "I never doubted you for a second, sister. You were always meant to be seen." And for the first time in decades, I felt the full weight and freedom of that truth. I was seen, I was respected, I was finally home, in the open air, on the road, in the garage, in my life. And nothing, not guilt, not betrayal, not the past, could take that away. 3 months had passed since the court ruling, but it felt like a lifetime of transformation had occurred in that short span. My shop, Patterson Precision Motorcycles, was thriving. The insurance money had allowed me to invest in the best equipment, a prime location, and 2 apprentices, both young women eager to learn not just the mechanics, but the pride of mastering a craft that had been my soul's work for decades. Every day, I felt that pulse of life returning. Not the timid, accommodating pulse of the Lori who had hidden in kitchens and offices, but a steady, confident rhythm that matched the roar of a well-tuned engine. Rita had been my right hand in every step of this transformation, my co-conspirator in reclamation. That morning, she stood in my apartment, holding up a dress. It was elegant black, a classic cut, but she had insisted I wear my own touch. Jewelry fashioned from motorcycle chains, polished silver linking together like a statement of strength. "You're fancy and fierce," she said, a grin teasing her lips. "You're going to shock them with who you've become." I laughed, the sound lighter than it had been in years. "I hope they're ready," I said, "because this isn't just a speech, it's a declaration." The gala hall shimmered under chandeliers, filled with local politicians, business leaders, and journalists. Televised cameras dotted the room, the hum of anticipation vibrating through the crowd. I was seated at a table with the mayor, a state senator, and the director of a vocational trade school. Women and men who had the power to shape opportunities for future generations. The director leaned forward, eyes bright. "Ms. Patterson," he said, voice warm, "we'd love to partner with you on a Women in Trades program, to show young women they can excel in fields traditionally dominated by men." I smiled, thinking of the apprentices back at the shop, their faces eager, hands ready to learn. "I'm listening," I said. Then, the moment arrived. The MC's voice rang out, announcing the keynote speaker. "Please welcome master mechanic and entrepreneur, Lori Patterson." I stood, feeling the familiar tension that always preceded stepping into the spotlight. My leather jacket, now folded neatly at my table, had been replaced with the black gown, my silver chain jewelry glinting like armor. As I walked to the stage, my pulse quickened, but not from fear, from excitement, from ownership, from finally claiming my narrative. And there they were, Andrew and Sophia, my children. My breath caught, but they were not poised to disrupt. Andrew held a sleek black portfolio labeled Patterson Legacy Project, and Sophia's hands were folded in her lap, tears glistening. I drew a deep breath and began. 3 months ago, I was homeless and heartbroken, not because I lacked skills, but because I hid them. For decades, I let others take credit for my work, for my life. I let my family believe I was less than I am. I spoke of the years of letting Tom take credit, the accusations that had cut me to the core, the road that had carried me through grief and anger, and the discovery of the truth under the hood of my beloved shovelhead. The story flowed from me, not with bitterness, but with clarity and the raw power of reclaimed identity. "But here's what I learned," I continued, voice strong, resonant. "Your value doesn't come from other people's recognition. It comes from knowing what you're capable of, from owning your skills, your decisions, and your life. From my evening bag, I pulled a small wrench. The crowd chuckled softly, the gesture unexpected but potent. "This tool," I said, holding it up, "has been in my hand longer than my wedding ring. It's not just metal and mechanics, it's who I am." Laughter and applause filled the room, the sound like thunder rolling over a wide-open road. I let it wash over me before continuing. "And to every woman who's been told she's too old, too feminine, too anything to do what she loves, you're not. You're exactly enough. You've always been enough." I turned my gaze toward Andrew and Sophia. "And to my children, I forgive you, not because you deserve it yet, but because I deserve peace." Sophia rose to her feet, tears streaming freely, and for the first time I saw vulnerability mingled with a desire to reconnect. Andrew followed her lead, holding up his portfolio with trembling hands. "Mom," he said, voice cracking, "I've been documenting everything. Every bike you built, every customer you saved, every innovation you created, your legacy." The audience rose in a standing ovation, a wave of recognition and respect that I had waited 40 years to feel. My chest tightened, warmth flooding through me, tears pricking at the corners of my eyes. Not sorrow, but triumph. After the applause subsided, they approached my table. Andrew's eyes met mine, humility etched into every line of his face. "I'm in trade school," he admitted softly, "learning to be a proper mechanic, starting over." I studied him, seeing not the spoiled, entitled child, but a man willing to confront his failures. "Good," I said, voice steady. "It's honest work. It will teach you patience, responsibility, and respect. Everything you needed to learn." Sophia gently took my hand, warmth and apology in her touch. "I want to learn too," she said, voice quivering, "to understand what you love. Will you teach me?" The old Lori would have said yes immediately, eager to mend all wrongs. But the new Lori, forged in the fire of loss, discovery, and reclamation, paused. She considered carefully, weighing forgiveness against accountability. "One lesson at a time," I said finally. "We'll see if you have the patience for it." Andrew swallowed, a mix of humility and determination in his expression. Can I work for you? As an apprentice? I'll start at the bottom. I'll earn it." I looked at him, the respect in his eyes shining brighter than any medal or award. Part of me wanted to reject him outright, but I saw the spark I hadn't seen in years, the recognition of what it takes to build something real. "We'll talk," I said, my voice soft but firm. "But you'll earn your place, just like everyone else. Just like every apprentice, respect is earned, not demanded." That night, as the gala lights dimmed and the crowd dispersed, I sat alone for a moment, taking in the quiet glow of the city through the towering windows. My heart was full of triumph, forgiveness, and cautious hope. I had reclaimed my life, my skills, and my dignity, and now I had the chance to teach, to share, and to build a legacy that could not be taken from me again. For the first time in decades, I felt completely, unapologetically, and gloriously myself. 6 months had passed since the gala, and the pulse of life I had reclaimed was now the pulse of a thriving business. Patterson Precision Motorcycles had grown, and not just in size. We were expanding to a second location in the city. Walking through the shop in the early morning, I paused to watch our team. 12 women, trained in advanced motorcycle mechanics, moved with precision and confidence. Their hands, once hesitant, now wielded wrenches, polishers, and diagnostic tools with authority. Every spark, every turn of a bolt was a testament to what dedication and belief could achieve. Andrew worked 3 days a week in the main shop. He was still awful at diagnostics. His frustrations sometimes echoed across the garage. But there was something else there now. A carefulness with customers, a patience I hadn't seen in him before. He listened, learned, and for the first time, he respected the process instead of rushing through it. It reminded me of Tom in strange, ironic ways. Andrew had absorbed some of his father's charm without the arrogance. Sophia volunteered on weekends, hands trembling the first time she held a carburetor, grease smudging her palms. I guided her, letting her feel each connection, each spring, each small imperfection that needed attention. She faltered, corrected, faltered again, and slowly humility began to settle in her movements. It was beautiful to watch. She was learning that mastery required patience, that mechanics were not just about strength or speed, they were about respect, observation, and care. Rita was my business partner, a constant force of encouragement. She leaned against a workbench one morning, boots dusty, arms crossed, grin wide. "We make a hell of a team, Lori," she said. Her words were easy to say, but heavier with the truth of all we had survived together. Morrison ran our vintage restoration division, handling old bikes as if they were sacred artifacts. "These bikes deserve respect," he said one afternoon, adjusting the carburetor on a 1950s Triumph. "Just like their owners, you built that respect, Lori. You gave it back to these machines, and now you give it to them." Even with the shop bustling, I still rode alone sometimes, craving that silent conversation with the wind, the engine, and myself. On one such ride, the desert stretching golden beneath the setting sun, I stopped at Tom's grave. Kneeling, I placed my wrench on his headstone. "I finally put my name on the work, old man," I whispered. "I wish you'd been brave enough to let me do it sooner." The breeze stirred, and I imagined his quiet, familiar nod in reply. I thought about the Lori of a year ago, invisible, diminished, a shadow of her own capabilities. And I compared her to the woman I had become, visible, skilled, confident, and unapologetic. Every scar on my hands, every smudge of oil, every silver streak in my hair was a badge of survival, of mastery, of a life reclaimed. My phone buzzed. Sophia. "Mom, I rebuilt my first carburetor today. Morrison said it was perfect." I smiled, thumbs flying across the screen. "Proud of you. That's real work. You earned it." The Harley rumbled beneath me as I headed back toward town, the desert around me painted in amber and gold by the setting sun. I felt it in my chest, deep and steady. The truth I had carried for 40 years. 40 years spent ashamed of grease under my fingernails, 40 years of hiding skills, passion, and identity. 2 months on the road had reminded me why I loved motorcycles, the freedom, the connection, the clarity, and now I was building something that honored the real me. Pulling into the shop, I saw Rita closing up, 2 apprentices bent over a welding project. They waved, bright smiles on their faces. I felt it, the sensation I had once thought lost, pride in my work, pride in myself, pride in being seen as who I truly was. I parked the bike and dismounted, the familiar weight of helmet and gear replaced by an inner calm. Rita handed me a beer, her grin mischievous. "Good ride?" "The best," I said, letting the words carry the truth. "Nothing but me, the machine, and the open road." "That's the Lori I know," she said softly. "The one who was always there, just waiting to be seen." Later, as I locked up the shop, I ran my hand along the workbench, worn and scarred, streaked with oil and paint. Beautiful, honest, ours. Andrew's question from the gala echoed in my mind. "Will you ever forgive us?" The answer was not simple. Forgiveness was not a destination. It was a journey. And like the open road, it would twist, turn, and stretch far beyond what I could see. My children were beginning to understand that their mother was not the woman they thought they knew. She was better, stronger, and more skilled than they ever imagined, and she was done hiding it. I looked at my reflection in a chrome fender, gray hair catching the last rays of sunlight, oil-stained hands steady, a confident smile spreading across my face. This was me. Lori Patterson, mechanic, rider, survivor, builder. The woman who had taken the long way home and found herself in every mile of the journey. I swung my leg over the Harley, the rumble of the engine echoing the rhythm of my heart. Not running away, not hiding, just riding because I could, because I deserved to, because I had earned every mile, every scar, every moment of triumph. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the desert in shades of fire and gold, I whispered to the wind, to the road, to the memory of the woman I used to be. This is freedom. This is life. This is the open road, and I am finally home. If you've enjoyed Lori's journey of courage, redemption, and rediscovery, don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more stories of resilience, empowerment, and inspiration. Every mile of the road has a story. Come ride along with us.